Out on the Dustridge border, the cowboys liked to pass around the same story about the giant Apache girl no one dared to touch. They said if she ever got mad, she could lift a full-grown man right off the ground as easily as hoisting a sack of flour. They said she was the reason children refused to step outside on windy nights. But one autumn afternoon, when she tripped and fell in front of the general store and the whole town just stood there watching, a white man stepped forward and held out his hand. "Let me help you up." The strange thing was not that he offered, but that he did not pull his hand back when he realized she was a head taller than he was. From that moment on, the Dustridge border was never quite the same. In the 1910s, Dustridge was a strip of dusty gray caught between an unfinished railroad and a half-dried river. The town had a single main street, one saloon, one general store, a small train depot, and more rumors than it had people. On the southern edge, near a patch of scraggly grass, there stood a shack larger than most. Folks said it belonged to the giant Apache girl. Not many were brave enough to walk close and find out for sure. Her name was Tazhi. The Apache in the area had given it to her for the wind in the mountains, the kind of wind strong enough to knock over saplings, but sometimes the same wind that carried the smell of new grass back to the tribe. Tazhi stood a full head taller than any man in Dustridge. Her shoulders were broad, her arms thick with muscle, the body of someone who had spent a lifetime hauling sacks of flour, carrying water, dragging timber without asking anybody for help. Her stride was as steady as the ground itself. Only her eyes did not match the stories people told. They were the eyes of someone easily hurt, always on guard, as if one careless moment would be all it took for the world to turn its back on her yet again. Whenever Tazhi walked into town, the air shifted, conversation faded, laughter dried up. Children ducked behind their mothers' skirts. A few men tried to prove they were not afraid by making jokes. Look at her. If she gets riled, she could probably lift this whole place right off its posts. They talked, but never too close. Tazhi heard all of it, every word, every stray laugh. She taught herself to keep her face still. She simply walked to the general store, ducked her head slightly so she would not catch the low beam, and handed over a list of what she needed. Her voice was low, rarely more than a few words at a time. The less she said, the more stories they invented about her. That afternoon, the autumn wind blew harder than usual. Dust curled up off the road in swirling sheets. On the porch of the general store, the wooden step had grown old, one board loosened by last night's rain. Tazhi stepped out, arms full, a sack of flour held against her chest, and several rolls of fabric tucked under her arm. As her foot came down on the loose board, it kicked sideways. A smaller person might have stumbled and caught themselves, but with her size and weight, that slip pulled her whole body down. The sound of her heavy frame hitting the street cracked through the afternoon like a gunshot. The flour sack burst and skidded away, white dust puffing into the air. The rolls of fabric bounced down the steps. The whole town turned to stare. No one laughed, but no one moved either. They just stood there, watching her the way people watch a wild animal that has suddenly gone down, curious to see what it will do next. Tazhi braced her hands and tried to push herself up. Her knee throbbed, her pride far worse. She clenched her teeth and swallowed the humiliation rising in her chest. She was used to people being afraid of her, but being watched like this, flat on the ground, was something she had never prepared for. She heard someone whisper, "Let's see what she does. Don't go near her. She might hit you." Another voice dropped lower. "She doesn't need anybody's help. That thing can get up on its own." Right then, inside that tight circle of staring eyes, a chair scraped back under the awning. A white man stood, He was not a big man. Next to her, he looked smaller than most of the men in town. He wore an old shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his hands marked with the calluses of someone who did real work. He stepped down from the porch, his boots crunching through the flour on the ground, and walked straight toward her. He stopped close enough that part of his face fell into her shadow. He held out his hand, palm open, steady, not flinching, not pulling back. "Let me help you up." His voice was calm, not loud, but clear enough that plenty of people heard him. The air seemed to freeze. Some of the men behind him smirked uneasily, half amused, half thrown off balance. An old woman sniffed. Micah's at it again. It turned out this was Micah Harlan, who worked at the depot, the man the town liked to put in the too kind for his own good category. He was the one who picked up stray pups in the street, the one who fixed the widow's porch without charging her a cent, the one who could talk drunk men out of fighting with only a few words. Tazhi looked at that hand, the hand of a man nearly half a head shorter than she was, a man who could just as easily have pulled it back and saved himself from being laughed at. But he did not. His eyes met hers, no fear there, no pity either. Just something very simple. Respect. For a brief second, memories rushed her. Every time she had stumbled before, she had always had to get up by herself. Every time someone had thrown a sharp word at her, all she could do was clench her fists until her nails dug into her palms. No one had ever reached out to her like this. Her heart tightened, not from pain, but from not knowing what to do with this sudden kindness. At last, she laid her hand in his. Her hand swallowed his, big, warm, heavy. Micah's fingers closed gently around hers. He planted his feet, braced himself, but it was her own strength that lifted her in one smooth motion. Still, to everyone watching, they saw only one thing. The giant Apache girl had allowed a white man to help her to her feet. When Tazhi stood solid again, Micah released her hand, without making a show of it, without playing the hero. He simply bent to pick up the torn flour sack, tied it off roughly with a string from his belt, and held it out to her. "Flour's still good. Next time, watch that step. I will come back and fix it." Tazhi looked at him. Her lips parted. In the end, only 2 words came out. "Thank you." Her voice was low, sounding strange even to her own ears. Micah gave a small smile. "You are welcome." As he walked back up the steps, the feeling in town shifted. No one said anything right away, but the looks on their faces were not quite the same. They had just watched someone do what none of them had the courage to do. As for Tazhi, when she walked away with the flour on her shoulder, her head still bent as always, something had changed. For the first time in many years, the weight in her chest felt just a little lighter. And she had no way of knowing that this one offered hand, on that ordinary afternoon, was about to shake the whole of Dustridge in a way nobody saw coming. The day Tazhi fell on the store steps turned into a story told in every corner of Dustridge. People talked more than they had seen, spoke louder than they understood, and like in every border town, gossip ran faster than any horse. In the saloon, 3 men sharing an old bottle of whiskey were telling the tale to a newcomer. One of them said, "That big girl hit the ground so hard it shook the street, and Micah still was not scared." Another smirked. Only the good Lord knows what is going on in that man's head. A third shrugged. Maybe he is sweet on her. The saloon broke into laughter, dry and a little strained. No one really believed Micah was the kind of man who went looking for trouble, but everyone knew he was the only one whose heart was big enough to do what the rest of them would not. Micah was different. He did not tell the story at all. That afternoon, when his shift at the depot ended, he walked straight to the general store steps and knelt to inspect the loose board. He tapped it with his fingers, then shook his head. "Yesterday was just an accident," he muttered. "Not worth all this talk." The shopkeeper looked down at him from the porch. "You planning to fix it?" Micah simply answered, "Everybody walks over these steps." But in his heart, the truth was clearer. He did not say it, but he was thinking about the look in Tazhi's eyes when she stared at his hand. It had not been the look of someone powerful. It had been the look of someone who had been hurt for far too long. Tazhi was the opposite. She stayed away from town for 3 days after the fall. The whole place assumed she was furious over what had happened, but the truth was something no one knew. She was not angry. She was unsettled, and that feeling scared her more than any rage ever had. In the shack at the southern edge, Tazhi sat by the fire and stared at her own hands. Hands that had crushed stone, pulled down trees, made grown men flinch. But that day, those same hands had rested inside the smaller hand of a man who did not pull away. She was not used to anyone being kind to her. She was so unused to it that her chest hurt in a strange, unfamiliar way. On the evening of the 3rd day, there was a soft knock at her door. No one ever knocked on her door. Tazhi rose and ducked her head as she stepped out. On the threshold stood Micah, holding a small wooden box. "I brought this for you," he said. He lifted the lid to show her. Inside were 2 new nails and a long plank of wood. "I replaced the step today. I kept the old board. You can use it for firewood." Tazhi studied him for a long moment. "Oh, you did not need to do that." Micah answered gently, "It is not just about the step. I just thought, you deserve a day that is a little less hard." She did not know how to answer. At last she managed, "I do not know if someone like me will get you into trouble." Micah smiled. "If anyone asks, I will say I fix steps for everybody. And if they laugh, that is their problem." A quiet stretch of time settled between them. Then Micah added, his voice very soft, "That day, I did not help you because I felt sorry for you. I helped because you fell." Tazhi nodded slightly. "I understand." But inside, what he said weighed far more than those 2 small words. The next morning, when she walked into town to buy salt and beans, there was a small change she did not notice right away. The stares were not made of pure fear anymore. Some looked awkward, some looked unsure. And for the first time, there was a small nod from the shopkeeper. "Steps solid now," he said. "You will not slip again." Tazhi nodded back. "I know. Micah fixed it." That sentence traveled faster than anyone expected. By noon, the blacksmiths' wives were whispering to each other. Micah fixed her step. He did. Would not take money. By afternoon, a man in the saloon was saying loudly, "Heard Micah is standing up for her." By nightfall, the story had turned into, "Micah has taken a special interest." Dustridge was a small place, but its people's hearts were smaller still. One simple act of kindness had become a tale everyone felt the need to add a line to. What no one said out loud was the most telling part. As the town started to notice Tazhi in a new way, it also started to fear what it did not understand. And what it did not understand was why a giant Apache girl could earn the kindness of a white man they had always assumed belonged entirely to them. Micah did not see that. Tazhi did not yet either. But the border has a way of twisting even the simplest stories, and one outstretched hand can be the beginning of something far bigger than either of them ever imagined. Dustridge was not the kind of place where a rumor could lie still. Just a few days after the story of Micah's outstretched hand began to spread, the whole town started looking at Tazhi with a different kind of gaze. Not quite friendly, not quite fearful, just curious. Curious why a man like Micah would bother with a girl they had all decided was a danger to the border. That day, Tazhi walked into town with a fresh sack of flour. As she passed the saloon, a few whispers rose up. A young man jerked his chin toward her. If she crashed into one of those posts, the whole place would probably come down. The man beside him laughed. Not if Micah's there to hold it up. The group broke into loud, rough laughter. Tazhi heard every word, but for the first time her chest did not tighten the way it always did. She simply tightened her grip on the sack's handle and kept walking. On her way back, she saw Micah standing beside a freight car, stacking wooden crates. He looked up when he spotted her. "Tazhi," he called, his voice easy as an evening breeze. "You're carrying too much again." Tazhi set the flour down. "I'm used to it." Micah's eyes dropped to her hands, to the old calluses layered over the new ones. "Being used to something," he said softly, "doesn't mean you should keep bearing it." The simple line made the air around her shift again. Tazhi did not know how to answer. In the end, she only said, "You don't have to worry about me." Micah bent, hefted the sack onto his own shoulder before she could react. "I'm not worrying. I just want to help." For a brief second, Tazhi looked at him as if she were asking herself why a man smaller and weaker than she was would want to help the woman no one else dared walk near. But Micah only smiled and started down the dirt road toward the outskirts of town. That was the first time the people of Dustridge saw them walking side by side. A giant Apache woman, tall and solid as a timber post, and an ordinary-looking white man who moved beside her as if it were the most natural thing in the world. That evening, wind pushed hard over the rooftops. In the saloon, Inspector Hatley, head of the Border Patrol, was drinking. He listened as the men told how Micah had carried the flour for the big girl. His face darkened. "Those two shouldn't be walking that close together," he said. "It invites trouble." When someone asked him why, he answered shortly, "A woman like her shouldn't be treated like she's just another person. It's not good for the town, not good for the border." The men around him nodded. No one dared argue with Inspector Hatley. Meanwhile, in the shack to the south, Tazhi was spreading the new cloth across her table. She set the sack Micah had carried into a corner. Her hand brushed the fabric and trembled just a little. She looked down at her own fingers and remembered the moment they had stood close. Remembered Micah's eyes. Eyes that did not fear her, did not watch her carefully, did not judge. For the first time in her life, she felt something she herself could barely name, a quiet, elusive warmth. That night, a sound stirred outside her door. Tazhi tensed, then stepped out to find Micah again, holding a small sack. "I brought some food," he said. "Thought you might need it." Tazhi stood there for a moment, unsure what to do with that kind of concern. At last, she opened the door a little wider. "Come in. The wind's cold." It was the first time she had ever invited a man into her home. Micah stepped across the threshold, glanced around, then said softly, "This place, it looks like you." Tazhi frowned. "Like me how?" Micah smiled, strong and quiet in its own way. She studied him. "You're not afraid of me?" Micah looked up. "If you wanted to scare me, you would have done it already." The answer left her without words. Even her voice carried a hint of uncertainty when she finally said, "I don't want to scare anyone." Micah replied, "I know." When he left, the awkwardness clung to her broad shoulders like a cloak she was not used to wearing, but something in her eyes had shifted. A tiny opening, just wide enough for Dustridge to sense, even if no one saw it directly. 3 days later, Inspector Hatley called a meeting at the depot. His voice was rigid as he spoke. "We cannot let that Apache girl start influencing people in town." He did not say Micah's name, but everyone knew who he meant. And in that moment, Dustridge, a place that had learned to survive on silence, began to tremble. All because of one act of kindness, and what was coming next would shake it even more. After the meeting at the depot, something shifted in Dustridge. Tazhi felt it even before the whispers reached her small shack. The glances that had always been cold now grew sharper, more wary. Some people stopped bothering to hide the way they looked at her, like she was a thorn that needed pulling. She was used to being seen as a threat, but this time something was different. Their eyes were turning toward Micah even more than toward her. Tazhi did not understand that at first. Micah did. And that was what worried him more than anything he had faced before. One early morning, as he was hauling a sack of wheat from the storage shed to the depot, Inspector Hatley stepped in front of him. "Micah," he said in an even tone, "I want a word." Micah set the sack down. "About what?" Hatley folded his arms. "About that Apache girl. You are making the townsfolk uneasy." Micah frowned. "I have not done anything," Hatley answered at once. "You help her. You talk to her. You walk beside her. For Dustridge, that is more than enough to stir trouble." Micah's hands tightened. "She is not causing trouble." Hatley stared straight into his eyes. "It is not about what she does. It is about what she is." Micah drew in a slow breath, his voice dropping lower. "If a decent act makes you nervous, then I am not the one with the problem." Hatley did not like that. His face darkened. "Micah, I advise you to stay away from her, for your sake, and for this town's." Micah did not answer, but his eyes said it clearly. He was not going to back away. At the same time, Tazhi was facing her own change. When she stepped into the saloon to buy a bottle of honey, the saloon keeper, who had always kept his mouth shut before, suddenly snapped at her. "You ought not to show up so much. Folks do not like it." Tazhi laid a coin on the counter. I am only buying honey." He shoved the bottle toward her. "The problem is not the honey. The problem is you." Tazhi looked at him for a long moment. At last she said, "I do not want to be a bother." But as she turned to leave, he muttered just loud enough for her to hear, "Truth is, you just need to go somewhere else." The bottle trembled in her hand, but she did not turn back. She walked out with her shoulders straight and her heart heavy. By late afternoon, Micah was at her door. He knocked twice before she opened it. He saw something in her eyes then, not anger, but the raw cut of someone who had been hurt one more time. He spoke quietly. "Tazhi, what did they say to you?" She turned back into the hut, letting him follow. "It does not matter." Micah shook his head. "It matters to me." Tazhi sat down by the fire, her big hands resting on her knees. "They do not want me here," Micah answered immediately. "I do." She lifted her gaze. "You do not understand. They have started talking about you. They do not like you helping me." Micah sat down beside her, his voice low but firm. "I do not help you for their sake. I help you because I choose to." Tazhi stared into the flames for a long time. "You are not afraid of me?" Micah said softly. Only one thing scares me. What is that? The thought that you believe you do not deserve anyone treating you kindly. The words struck her heart like an arrow finding the weakest place. She turned her face away, but Micah had already seen the faint shine of moisture in her eyes. That night, as the wind slipped through the roof of the hut, Tazhi spoke a sentence that surprised even her. Micah, if you want to stay away from me, I will not blame you. Micah looked at her, firelight tracing his features. I am not going anywhere. What neither of them knew was that outside the hut, two figures were hidden behind the brush. Hatley had sent them to watch. One of them whispered, "We have to act soon. We cannot let this go on." The other nodded. If Micah gets pulled over to her side, nobody will be able to control what happens next. The wind roared across the grasslands, and Dustridge, a town that had always prided itself on being a quiet line on the map, began to shift like ground ready to tremble. All because of a single act of kindness. And the price of it was drawing closer with every hour. That evening, the wind blew harder than usual. In Dustridge, the wind usually carried dust or the sour scent of fuel from the trains. Tonight it carried something else, a tightness in the air. Inside the hut, Tazhi could hear the leaves scraping against each other like a warning. Something in her chest would not settle. Micah sat in front of the fire, trying to stay calm, but every so often his hands clenched, as if he were waiting for something to happen. After a while, there was a sound outside. Not the wind, not some wild animal. Footsteps. Two figures stepped out from the brush. One carried a torch. The other held a length of rope. They stopped not far from the hut, faces hidden beneath the brims of their caps. The man with the torch raised his voice so it would carry inside. "Tazhi, come out. We have something to set straight." Micah stood up at once. "Stay here, I will go." Tazhi set a hand on his shoulder. "Let me." Micah shook his head. "I am going with you." They stepped outside together. The wind blew so hard, the torch flame shuddered and twisted. The man with the rope pointed straight at Micah. "We have orders to make this clear to you. Stay away from her. Dustridge does not want trouble." Micah answered without a tremor. "She has not done anything." The man with the torch gave a cold little laugh. "You think being kind to someone like her is going to make this town grateful to you? Tazhi does not belong here." Tazhi stood very still. The wind rushed through her thick hair. Firelight washed over her broad face and deep eyes, eyes like a stretch of land no one had ever dared to cross. She was not angry. She was tired. Tired of always having to prove she was not a danger. Her voice was low and steady. "I have never harmed anyone." The man with the rope shot back. "Not yet, but one day you will." Micah stepped forward, placing himself between them and Tazhi. "No, she is not what you think she is." The man with the torch stiffened. "So you stand on her side?" Micah did not hesitate. "Yes." The silence after that felt so heavy even the ground seemed to listen. The man with the torch flicked his hand, a small signal. "Fine. Then you come with us. Inspector Hatley will talk some sense into you." They moved closer, but Micah took one step back and came shoulder to shoulder with Tazhi. He did not shout, did not posture. He simply said, "You are not taking me anywhere until you have heard what she has to say." Tazhi turned to look at him. Something inside her chest seemed to loosen and lift. She had never seen anyone stand like that, in front of her, for her. She spoke very softly. "Micah, do not do this." Micah answered, "Tazhi, I am not going anywhere." The man with the rope was starting to lose patience. "You do not get to decide that." Tazhi drew a long breath. In that moment, she did not stand the way they always saw her. Not as a giant, not as a threat, not as a storm. She stood as a human being, guarding the one thing she had just found that truly mattered. She said each word clearly. "If you lay a hand on him, you will have to go through me." The two men understood exactly what that meant. An Apache woman taller than both of them, strong as three men together, was now standing between them and the man they meant to take. They stepped back, not far, just a little, but enough to show the doubt that had crept into their eyes. Micah moved half a step forward, so he stood fully even with her. "No one has to fight," he said. "I am only saying one thing. She does not belong to danger. She belongs to herself." The wind surged, tossing sparks from the torch into the air like tiny glowing flecks. The two men glanced at each other. They had not wanted this to turn into a confrontation. They knew that if they pushed it further, they might not like what it cost them. At last, the man with the torch lowered his hand. "All right, but if anything happens, we will be back." Micah answered, "I will be here. I will answer for it." Tazhi added one more line, a line that made both men drop their eyes before they turned to go. "And so will I." When they left, the wind seemed to soften. Micah turned to her. "Are you all right?" Tazhi spoke quietly, almost more to herself than to him. "You should not have done that because of me." Micah gave a faint smile. "Kindness is not something I have to think through. It is something I want to do." Tazhi looked at him, her eyes gentling like the last embers of a dying fire. "Micah," he answered. "Yes?" She drew a breath, then spoke words she had never dared say in her life. "From now on, if you want to stay beside me, I will not turn you away." Micah looked straight into her eyes, where the firelight reflected like a simple promise. "I want to." That night, they sat together by the fire in the hut. They did not say much more. There was only the quiet ease of two people who had found something rare on the borderlands, a small, steady warmth. People said a single act of kindness could shake the whole frontier. In Dustridge, it did more than that. It opened a door Tazhi had thought locked for life. And on the other side of that door, Micah was waiting. In Dustridge, the wind still sweeps down the dusty streets just like every other year. But folks say that from that autumn on, something had changed. They say when Micah chose to stand beside Tazhi, the whole border seemed to pause for one quiet beat. Not because of her strength, but because of the way she allowed someone to reach the kindest part of her heart. And after that, the looks around town were not quite as sharp as they used to be. A few people started to nod in greeting. A few stopped being so afraid, and Tazhi, for the first time in her life, learned what it felt like to stand beside someone without having to bow her head under the weight of loneliness. Out on the edge of Dustridge, in a small hut lit by soft golden firelight, two people had found a piece of peace the frontier almost never gives to anyone easily. If this story made you slow down for a moment and breathe a little easier, please subscribe to Tales from the Wild West. And don't forget to like, comment, and ring the bell, so that whenever the border wind blows your way, you will have a gentle story waiting to warm your heart.